You can think about what it is that you did wrong or insufficiently that lead to the collapse of your plan. So that the first investigation, I made some sacrifices. I attempted to bring about a particular form of the future. It didn't happen. Okay, why? Well, the world is set against me and the cosmos is evil and there is no God and I'm bitter and cynical. That's one potential explanation for me. And I'm not trying to be flippant about this because sometimes people's dreams are quite realistic and they still fail catastrophically. It can be brutal. Maybe you did make a lot of good decisions and you suddenly got ill or someone in your family did and everything went hell on you. It doesn't have to be because you've done everything went to hell on you. It doesn't have to be because you've done something cardinally foolish that you failed. It's built into the structure of the world, but it doesn't matter. You can also retreat into yourself and you can say something like, all right, I need to retool my conception of a strategy, but also potentially my conception of goal. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. Maybe I have to look somewhere else, and you can open yourself up to a revelation. So there is a gospel statement that's very relevant to this. So Christ tells his followers that if they knock, the door will open. If they're sick, they will receive. If they're sick, they will find. And so it sounds magical. It sounds like the sort of things that new atheists would have a field day with. But that's not a wise interpretation of that saying. The proper interpretation is something more like a recognition of the day thought works. Imagine your plans didn't work out. Okay, now just sit down and say to yourself, I'd like to know, even if the world was conspiring against me and my failure was 95% of the fault of external occurrence and other people. Why did I do that wasn't as good as it could have been, or where did I fail to look so that the probability of any failure was higher? Now, to ask that question, you have to want an answer. That's what it means to knock or ask or seek. This is no joke. It's like you have to want to know, and it's a very painful thing to do because especially if you had given it all your degree, you were able and you have reason to be bitter. You're gonna be searching for the errors that will still made. And discovering your own errors is always extremely painful, right? Especially if there are errors that you're in love with. And so you have to be willing to strip yourself down. That's what humility means fundamentally. But the advantage is this. This is why it's so useful to listen to people. You might find out where you're stupid, and then you could stop being stupid. One of the reasons that confess your sins, let's say, is because you want to discover where you're insufficient. Now, it's painful. It's painful to encounter an impediment in the form of someone else's opinion that might show you where you're blind or ignorant and willfully blind even. But the advantage to that is you can rectify the errors, and then as you move forward, you're stronger. What happens if instead we decide to stop lying? What does this even mean? We're limited to our knowledge after all. We must make decisions here and now. Even though the best means and the best goals can never be discerned with certainty. An aim and ambition provides a structure necessary for action. An aim provides a destination, a point of contrast between against the present and the framework with which all things can be evaluated. An aim defines progress and makes such progress exciting. An aim reduces anxiety because if you have no aim, everything can mean anything or nothing. And neither of those two opinions makes for a tranquil spirit. Thus, we have to think and plan and limit and pause in order to live at all. How then to envision the future and establish your direction without falling prey to the temptation of a totalitarian certainty. Some reliance on tradition can help us establish our aims. It's reasonable to do what other people have always done unless we have a very good reason not to. It's reasonable to become educated and work and find love and have a family. That's how culture maintains itself, but it's necessary to aim at your targets, however traditional, with your eyes wide open. You have a direction, but it might be ill-formed. You may have been led astray by your own ignorance, and worse, by your own unrevealed corruption. You must make friends, therefore, with what you do not know instead of what you know. You must remain away to catch yourself in act. You must remove the beam in your own eyes before you concern itself with the motes in the brothers. And in this way, you will strengthen your own spirit, so it can tolerate the burden of existence. And you rejuvenate the state. It's our responsibility to see what is before eyes courageously and to learn from it, even if it seems horrible. Even if the honor of seeing is damaged our consciences and have blinded us, the act of seeing is particularly important when it challenges what we know and rely on, upsetting and destabilizing us. It's the act of seeing that informs the individual and updates the state. You are by no means only what you already know. You are also all part which could know if you only would. Thus, you should never sacrifice what you could be for what you are. You should never give up the better that resides within for the security you already have, and certainly not you have already caught a glimpse, an undeniable glimpse of something beyond. In the Christian tradition, Christ identified with the Logos. The Logos, the world gods, that would transform chaos into order at the beginning of time. In his human form, Christ sacrificed himself voluntarily to the truth, to the good, to God. In consequence, he died and was reborn. The word that produces order from chaos sacrifices everything, even itself, to God. That single sentence, wise beyond comprehension, sums up Christianity. Every bit of learning is a little death. Every bit of new information challenges a previous conception, focusing it to dissolve into chaos before it can be reborn as something better. Sometimes such deaths virtually destroy us. In such cases, we might never recover, or if we do, we change a lot. A good friend of mine discovered that his wife of decades was having an affair. He didn't see it coming. It plunged him into a deep depression. He descended into an underworld. He told me at one point, I always thought that people who are depressed should just shake it off. I didn't have any idea what I was talking about. Eventually, he returned from a depth in many ways. He was a new man, and perhaps I was a better man. He lost 40 pounds. He ran a marathon. He traveled to Africa and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Set yourself ambition even if they're uncertain about what they should be. The better ambition has to do with the development of character and ability rather than status and power. Status. You can lose, you can carry character with the character who, whatever you are, and wherever you go. And it allows you to prevail against diversity. Knowing this, tie a rope to a boulder, pick up the great stone, having it in front of you, and you pull yourself toward it. Watch and observe while you move forward. Articulate your experience as clearly and carefully to yourself, to others, as you possibly can. In this manner, you will learn to proceed more effectively and efficiently towards your goal. And while you are doing this, do not lie, especially to yourself. If you pay attention to what you do and say, you can learn to feel the state of internal division and weaknesses. When you're misbehaving and misspeaking, it's an embedded sensation, not a thought. I experience an internal sensation of sinking and division rather than solidity and strength. When I am incautious with my acts and words, it might be centered in my solar plexus, where a large knot of nervous tissues resides. I learned to recognize when I was lying, in fact, by noticing these things in division and then inferring the presence of a lie. It often took me a long time to ferret out the deception. Sometimes I was using words for appearance. Sometimes I was trying to disguise my own true ignorance of the topic at hand. Sometimes I was using the words of others to avoid the responsibility of thinking for myself. If you pay attention, when you are seeking something, you will move toward your goal. More importantly, however, you will acquire the information that allows your goals itself to transfer. A totalitarian never asks, "What if my current ambition in error?" He treats it instead as the absolute. It becomes a God for all intent and purposes. It constitutes the highest value. It regulates his emotion and motivational status and determines his thoughts. All people serve their ambition in that matter. There are no atheists. There are only people who know and do not know what gods they serve. If you bend everything totally, blindly and willfully toward the attainment of a goal, and only that goal, you will never be able to discover if another goal would serve you and the world better. There's this that you sacrifice if you do not tell the truth. If instead you tell the truth, your value transforms as you progress. If you allow yourself to be informed by the reality manifesting itself as you struggle forward, your notion of what is important will change. You will reorient yourself, sometimes gradually and sometimes subtly and radically. The ultimate deal is also ultimate judge, because the ultimate deal is something ultimate against which you fall for short. And that might be so painful that you can barely stand it. But then, what do I is you? Two things. I suppose if you lower the ideal and you raise your estimation of your potential. And what do I mean by lower the ideal? Well, if you're comparing yourself to someone or even the future self. And the gap is so painful that paralyzes you. You have created a dragon that you do not have the tool to master. And so, what you have to do is you have it scale down the dragon to size. And you want to scale the dragon down to size until it's size that you're willing to move forward, however small that. Now, if you're here and your ideal is here and the gap is unbearable, then it reduces the gap and you reduce the gap. And you're going to have to do that anyways, because you're not going to move from where you are to perfect in one fell swoop, right? There's gonna be incremental steps, so you have to fail in hierarchy of progression with high enough resolution representation so that you can start to move forward. And you should be Peterson. There is another gospel statement that's very interesting. It has to do, it's called the Matthew principle. The Matthew principle is, to those who have everything, more will be given, and from those who have nothing, everything will be taken. Now, it's brutal because it implies that reality works like this. When you're moving up, you go like this, right? And that's pretty nice. That's a lot better than this. But when you're going down, you go like this, right? It's like downhill cliff. Okay, so you want to avoid the downhill path. Well, if your uphill path is like this, which is like exponential, let's say, a geometric, then what that means is that doesn't matter how big the first steps you take uphill are, even if they're trivial, even if they're shameful in their size, because you're so useless that if you're disciplined in that, you will speed up extraordinarily rapidly. And so that's the good news. You might say, is that you can take away small step, even ones that might be shameful in their size. And you have to admit that yourself. But once you get the ball rolling, it doesn't roll in a linear fashion. It rolls in a geometric fashion. And this is really a good thing to know, because it can take this thing out of realization of your own stupidity. Imagine you go to engineering school because that's what your parents desire. But this is not what you want. Working at cross progress at your own wishes, you will find yourself unmotivated and failing. You will struggle to concentrate and discipline yourself, but it will not work. Your soul will reject the tyranny of your will. How else could that be said? Why are you complying? Why not want to disappoint your parent? Although if you fail, you will do exactly that. You may lack the courage of the confidence necessary to free yourself. You may not want to sacrifice your childish belief in parental missions, wishing devotedly to continue believing that there is something who knows you better than you know yourself and who also knows all about the world. You want to be shielded in this matter from the stark existential aloneness of individual being and its attendant responsibility. This is very common and understandable, but you suffer because you're truly not meant to be an engineer. One day you have had enough. You drop out. You disappoint your parents. You learn to live with that. You consult only yourself, even though that means you must rely on your decisions. You take a philosophy degree. You accept the burden of your own mistakes. You become your own person by rejecting your father's vision. You develop your own, and then, as your parents age, you've become adult enough to be there for them. When they come to need you, they win too. But both victories had to be purchased at the cost of conflict, endangered by your truths. As Matthew 10:34 has it, citing Christ, emphasizing the role of spoken truth. Think not that I have come to send peace to the earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. As you continue to live in accordance with the truth, as it reveals itself to you, you will have to accept and deal with the conflicts that mood of being will generate. If you do so, you will continue to mature and become more reasonable in some ways. Do not underestimate their importance and enlarge. You will more closely approach your never newer and more wisely formulated goal and become ever wiser in their formulation. When you discover your rectified, inevitable errors, your conception of what is important will become more and more appropriate. As you incorporate the wisdom of your experience, you will quit wildly escalating the walk ever more directly toward the goods. A good you could never have comprehended if you had insisted, despite all evidence that you were right, absolutely right to the beginning. If existence is good, then the clearest, the cleanest, and most corrected relationship with that also good. If existence is not good, by contrast, you are lost. Nothing will save you, certainly not the pretty rebellious, markless thinking and blindness that constitute deceit is existence good. You have to take terrible risk to find out. Live in the truth or live in a deceit. Face the consequence and draw your conclusion. This is the act of faith, whose necessary was instead upon the Danish philosopher. You cannot know ahead of time. A good example insufficient for proof. Given the difference between individual, the sexes, a good example can always be attributed to luck. Thus, you have to risk your particular individual life to find out. It is this risk that ancient described as a sacrifice of personal will to the will of God. It is not an act of submission, at least submission is currently understood. It is the act of courage. It's faith that wind will blow your ship to a new or better port. It's the faith that being can be corrected by becoming. It's the spirit of exploration itself. Perhaps it's better to conceptualize in this way. Everyone needs to concrete specific goal and ambition and a purpose to limit chaos and make intelligible things or his or her life. But all such concrete goals can and should be subordinated to what might be considered a meta goal, which is a way of approaching and formulating goals themselves. This meta goal could be live in truth. This means act diligently towards some well-educated, articulated, defined, and temporary needs. Make your criteria of failure success timely and clear, at least to yourself, and even better, if others can understand what you're doing and evaluate it with what you're while doing. However, allow the world and your spirit to unfold as they will while to act out and articulate the truth. This is both programmatic ambition and the most courageous of faiths.